I think folks are still filtering through, but we might get started. So, welcome everyone to Intrigue's webinar here with the former Foreign Minister of Lithuania. We have Gabrielius Landsbergis joining us here. Gabrielius, where are you coming in from today? Where are you dialing
Munich,
in from? Pardon?
from Munich.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, we'll get
Yeah.
onto that later about the Munich Security Conference. So I think for those intriguers who are joining our webinar, as you know, we weren't able to record the last one, but today we are recording this one and we will later share the recording with everyone. Of course, I feel like Gabrielius needs no introduction. In many ways, we've already had a reader who reached out to us, Gabrielius, who said that he was so excited to have you speak, and he's already shared it with the Lithuanian diaspora community around the world. So you are really already a rock star name. But for those who are not familiar with Gabrielius, he was the foreign minister of Lithuania from 2020 to 2024. And during his time as foreign minister, he saw Lithuania become known globally as a standard bearer in the fight for freedom and rule of law. He's also a former graduate of Vilnius University. The one thing that I really would encourage everyone to do is to follow him on social media and subscribe to Gabrielius's newsletter, which is landbergis.ghost.io. And we will actually share this with everyone in the notes as well. But one thing that I really thought resonated with me was his line in Fighting for Freedom. And he wrote, "Freedom runs in my family and in the families of my fellow Lithuanians." So with that, I'm really excited to introduce him to today's webinar. We'll talk Russia in the West and what to watch for. We'll talk China, Taiwan, and also Lithuania's experience. And also for you, I want to make sure, Gabrielius, I flagged that we are also going to do a quick lightning round, which is what we have when I ask you the first word that comes to mind when I say these three words. So I think for today, it is international intrigue, it is globalism, and it is a Munich Security Conference. So just think about that before we turn over to Q&A. So speaking of Munich Security Conference, we know that it starts on Friday and you're already in Munich. We're going to have lots of world leaders and security chiefs attending this from all around the world, especially in Europe. Which big issues do you think will dominate this year's discussion?
I think it's unavoidable that we will talk about Ukraine. It will be a third Munich Security Conference because we will be marking, the third anniversary or third year of war against Ukraine, and third year in a row that will be the main topic. Despite everything that's happening around Munich, these days, and of course there will be discussions about Middle East and Iran and then China and whatnot, but the core of it will be Ukraine, and
Yeah.
President Zelensky will be here. Vice President J.D. Vance will be here. Just a couple of minutes, couple of hours ago, there have been comments from Brussels where Secretary of Defense had his briefing. So I think that people are coming in already with kind of many thoughts, hopefully ideas, and thinking that this week could be a very important week to European and global geopolitics.
Sorry, just had a bit of a boomer moment trying to find the unmute button there. Um, Thank you for sharing that, Gabriella. And I agree it's going to be really top of mind for everyone. And I think we were hoping to see some kind of resolution, but maybe that might not come yet. But how optimistic are you that some of these issues that you had mentioned can be resolved at Munich Security Conference, and what's holding us back?
Well, we're in the time of transition, so I don't think that we've seen crisis of this magnitude, before our eyes for decades. And people would say, and I agree with them, that even after the Second World War, the world has never been in a bigger transition than it is now. So it is difficult to expect that, despite having all the leaders here, and with the intention to find solutions, that they would be able to figure things out in a couple of days. I'm not very optimistic, to be frank with you, especially because there is the crisis that we are seeing is incredibly complex one. It requires not just leadership, but it requires to rethink the way that the West, EU work, how the decisions are being made, how do we stand up to our enemies, but also to our friends, and the transatlantic relationship is in question, how it will unfold in upcoming months or years. So all of this incredibly complex. And then you have a push by certain countries or people or leaders who say, okay, we have to get it fixed right now. And it's possible to fix it very quickly. And this is probably where my not so optimistic point of view comes from. I doubt that it is possible to solve something as complex, even in a couple of days, couple of hours, or even a couple of months. It's systemic. We need to look at it from systemic standpoint.
Yeah. And for those who are maybe not familiar with Gabrielius's background, he was also a former Lithuanian diplomat. So he has seen in the trenches how hard it is to actually make progress in government, and how slow it can be at times. Shifting gears now to Lithuania. I mean, your own country of Lithuania is only one of 6 NATO members that are bordering directly with Russia. What does that mean for day-to-day life there for Lithuanians, and how do your citizens feel towards Russia? I mean, maybe I can guess the answer to the last question, but I'd love to get more on that.
Well, usually when I'm asked the question, so where does your resolution towards freedom or supporting Ukraine or your own defense, where does it come from? I said, 2 things: our history and our geography. Right? It's very easy to explain. If there's a geopolitically minded country, so it could be Lithuania, because having no natural obstacles to further to the east, just swamps and forests, which have been breached in the past. So clearly, it gives you a very clear idea. How do we, where does our sense come from? Now, when I talk about history, our hundreds of years of history basically remind us that we've always been on the border. We've always hooked ourselves to the West, starting from 13th century when we, the first king of Lithuania took the crown from the Pope, but from Pope in Rome, not from, Constantinople. It was the first step, this is our direction. This is where we are. We're not the, Eastern Empire. We're not part of that. We want to be part of the Western culture, Western history. And for us, it always has been where the geopolitical clash would come from. We have just a couple of tens of kilometers from the capital. You have a very different attitude. You have a very different culture. You have a very different mindset, political mindset. I wouldn't say that all people subscribe to it. In Belarus, further you have Russia, and this is where a totally different world begins. And so you have that historic memory looming over you. And I started with something from 13th century, but even for me, it's quite real. I'm from a generation of people who do remember Russian tanks rolling in our capital.
Right.
And it's honestly,
not all
it's
that
the
long
same.
ago.
No, not that long ago. And it's the same tank that is rolling in the fields in eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's just they modernized it, but it looks exactly the same.
Right.
So you have people in their 40s who would remember. We were young then, but we do remember what it was not to be free, what it was to fight for freedom, and then we can easily compare to how do we live now. And this is one of the reasons why we do not want to go back, and this is why we do understand what Ukrainians are really fighting for.
Yeah. And I think, again, going to your website, I really loved one of your lines saying that I think it was one of your tweets that said we were never Soviet. It's not post-Soviet, but we were never Soviet.
Yeah.
I mean, Gabrielius, you were in the seat. You were sort of in the room when you were the foreign minister when the invasion of Ukraine happened. So from where you were, is there anything that, you were able to share now that's not classified that you think the West could have done or should have done differently to prevent Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, from the geopolitical standpoint, I think that we have to admit that there shouldn't be any, or actually not shouldn't be, but it will be impossible for countries to remain in what you could call a gray zone, a geopolitically gray zone, kind of not being part of the Western alliance, not aligning yourself with the West, not with Russia, or East, or China, and kind of and staying in a neutral position. That's no longer the case.
Right.
And I still believe that even it's quite obvious to somebody coming from the frontline country. We do understand that, for example, if Lithuania would try to retain its neutrality, when instead of joining NATO, most likely we would be either under immediate threat or already, under attack by Russians. So leaving countries like Moldova and Georgia and Ukraine in this gray zone and expecting that they will themselves somehow figure this out, well, unfortunately, that's no longer the case.
Right.
And now, since we're talking so much, and obviously the whole Munich will be devoted to that, talking about that, ceasefire or peace settlement or Ukraine's future. And again, I'm hearing, neutrality is the way forward. Well, that's naive at best, or I would find a stronger word, but let's not intimidate the viewers.
And we stick with naivety for now.
Yeah.
Now, switching gears to Washington, D.C., I mean, I'm based in Washington, D.C., and we're seeing the sort of, departures of Biden administration staff now, and including the Biden administration from office officially. Now, they were your U.S. counterparts during your time as foreign minister. Are there things that you wish that the U.S. had done differently during that time? I mean, I think one of the first interesting things was that the CIA had sort of pre-bunked the potential invasion of Ukraine, which I thought was very interesting. But from where you sat, how do you think things could have been done differently by the US under the Biden administration?
Well, it's an interesting question. I did quite a lot of thinking, for the reason that I've been in the room with the people, and I heard them speak.
Yes.
I heard them lay out the arguments, and I think you mentioned one example that they've been really, they had their hands on data and information as to what Russia is planning. But somewhere down the road, I think that Russians understood the way it works, and they kind of that's my hypothesis, that they started feeding the information through the same channels, and the administration continued to believing that this information is true because in the past it has been true.
Right.
And what I'm referring to is that the fact that was acknowledged publicly as well by Secretary Blinken, the former Secretary Blinken, this nuclear blackmail fact. In 2022, at the end of 2022, when Ukrainians were really successful in pushing Russians out, so they won the battle for Kiev, they won the battle for Kharkiv, they won the battle for Kherson, and this is where the Russians started freaking out that basically their front might collapse, the whole operation might collapse, because this was the time when the first tanks were not yet sent, but the decision to send the tanks was made, and the equipment was starting flowing into Ukraine. And Ukrainians and everybody else were starting to feel, oh, we can win this. It is possible. And this is where Russians, very successfully fed the information that if we break, we will nuke you or somebody. And we bought it.
Right.
We as the West, because it was kind of the doctrine of Biden administration that we have to take this seriously. And it paradoxically turned out into a very new policy of Ukraine, not allowing Ukraine to win, not allowing Ukraine to be too successful, and delaying and limiting support and kind of playing everything down. And at the end, 3 years later, we see that basically we shielded Russia for almost 2 years of their attack, because they were successful in winning one, probably the most important battle that they fought, that the battle in our minds. They got us to be afraid.
That's so useful to hear, Gabrielius. I think, a lot of the media were also breathless in the way that they had also caught on to that narrative and saying that, the Russians had the upper hand, etc. Now, shifting to one of your favorite topics, perhaps Europe, you wrote in your newsletter, which we will also link in our show notes, you had described the EU as quote unquote being in danger of being an existential threat to itself. Can you explain that to us? And, what's your assessment of Europe's response to the conflict so far? Are you optimistic the continent as well as the EU can change?
Well, again, it's a very interesting topic for me, because seeing how Europe works and why it works in a way. raised a lot of questions. What are we up to the tasks of today? Can we handle the crises that we see in front of us? So my point is that Europe was created as a peace project, right? From the in the continent that has been, it was extremely explosive, right? Where the decisions made by a single country would engulf the whole world into flames of war. So the way that Europe was structured to slow things down, the consensus culture, which is, it really does slow things down. So you talk things over for years, right? No reform can be implemented fast because it's just not the way that it was, expected to be. Actually, the opposite, right? We were figuring out how to slow things down. So we slowed it to a point where if you're facing a war, trade war, tariff war, if you're facing, aggressive China or anything, basically we're left helpless, and unable to move.
Yes.
Because the powers that are given to the Commission, which is an executive body and actually could react to the crisis at hand, are rather limited, and everything else retains in the Council, which always have to agree unanimously on every single issue. And then there was a clause of solidarity where, let's call them fathers or mothers of the Union. They thought, okay, but, we will still be able to discuss and find the way forward, because everybody will believe that this is a great crisis and we have to figure out, the path forward.
Right.
And unfortunately, this is not the case. We see that certain members of Union, they actually find it more useful to disrupt, to not allow for European Union to move forward, actually stopping it, stalling it, and I have Hungary in mind, with more than 50% or 60%, now I don't know the latest numbers, of decisions being blocked by a single member state. So it tells you, what you need to know. And also, since I started a bit with a historic example, so, Lithuania and Poland once was a single country, actually, for almost 400 years, that we had, one government, one parliament. And in that parliament of Lithuania and Poland, every single member of parliament would have a veto right on anything. And the last days of our common union, Lithuanian and Polish union, when it was clear that Russia, Austria, and then Prussia then decided to attack and divide our country, we were unable to muster an army because there was a group of parliamentarians who blocked every decision. And later we found out that they were actually in cahoots with Catherine the Great.
Oh,
so we've
that'd make a great Netflix series, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've been there some 300 years ago, and I wish that we wouldn't repeat the same mistake again.
Right. I mean, it's so fascinating to think about how the pace of the change in the world has really outpaced Europe and how it was set up to go. I mean, let's shift to the new US administration now. I'm jumping all over the place, but I also wanted to flag for our listeners at home, actually, that Gabrielius has also been a member of the European Parliament. So his insights there are very, very speaking from experience as well as historical context. But thinking about President Trump returning to power, how do you think the US and the broader West should now proceed? Obviously the world is very different set of rules, maybe a different rule book or playbook altogether. How do you think they should proceed in a way that, you would like to see an optimum outcome for your region?
It's always very fascinating to answer this question because it usually is coupled with the phrase something like, so we are approaching or already in the period of complete unpredictability, and what do you expect? Well, in unpredictability, basically you have to be ready to expect anything.
Yeah. Everything's up for grabs.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that, first couple of weeks of the new administration clearly shows that, that we are in completely unpredictable world, where things might end up better in some cases. They might end worse. They might be totally bad. And I was asked the question: so can NATO survive? Yeah, well, NATO definitely can survive. It's built for purpose. It has a lot of support, but can it break down? Yes, it is also possible. So that the trust with the road, the Russians would challenge us, and so many other things. To add to that, usually, and I mean, I would talk from the European perspective a little bit, is that in Europe we somehow try to answer a question: what should we do in case Mr. Trump does this or does that, and kind of. So we are trying to
scenario
expect,
planning, everyone's favorite
yeah.
policy world.
But my suggestion, I think that it's a very good time, even though short time that we have, to rethink the way that we function. So I've covered that a little bit, with my previous answer, and actually come up with our idea of what we bring to the table. Why we are a useful partner to US, why we are, why we bring benefit and peace and support to those who need it, and so many other things, and not just be waiting for something to come out of Washington so that we see what happened, and then we reconsider it, and then we have our answer. The world is changing, it's in flux, and we have to be ready to take up the challenge with because it might be better, but if that makes us complacent, like, oh, but maybe not the worst will come, and maybe we won't need to change. I think that is a very false thinking, and we should not give in to this kind of thinking. It's a crisis. Yeah. And if we waste it, it will be on us. Let's not waste a good crisis.
Let's not waste a good crisis. And with that, we're going to switch gears onto the APAC region now, Indo-Pacific. So, many folks in the US and broader Indo-Pacific were really surprised to see Lithuania, of all places in Europe, explode into the headlines with distant China and Taiwan during your term as foreign minister. Can you share with us your take on what happened? I think especially for folks who were not following what happened, but we were intrigued with following.
So what happened on the ground, so to say? Lithuania did not have any meaningful relationship with Taiwan, but clearly there was quite a lot of support to the people, and we figured that it would be for our benefit and also for Taiwanese benefit, to establish some sort of ties. Not breaking, one China policy, staying in line, but really, extending a hand. And after long deliberations, we've allowed Taiwan to open an office in Vilnius, and they have asked the office to be called, not like everywhere else where it's called Taipei. They asked for it to be called Taiwanese.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we made a decision to allow them that. And clearly this this was not very well taken by China, by Beijing, and they decided to retaliate very, very strongly. We were, even though in volumes the pressure on Australia was higher,
yes,
but
our lobsters took a hit,
But when it comes to the scope of the pressure, I don't think that there has ever been a precedent before Lithuania. So our trade went from something like 300 million that we had a year to basically zero over months. So nothing could reach Chinese ports. We were completely blocked out. With years, and it's already been several years, it got back to where it was, mainly because I think that there are things that China just need, maybe because there's a WTO case where European Commission represents Lithuania, so that could also be a reason for China to limit the pressure. But then again, our relationship with Taiwan flourished. Now we have a new government in place. At least for now, they're not offering, it to change anything. So hopefully it stays, and we continue being a small but persistent actor in the Pacific region.
I mean, it's so incredible that you were motivated to take a stand on an issue so far away. So I'd be curious to hear what motivated you when you were in that role, because often it's not the easy choice to make, right? When you're foreign minister, you have so many things to triage, and you chose to take a priority in that issue. And did you feel supported by your NATO and EU allies and partners during that time?
I would mention two main reasons. One has to do with China,
Hmm.
and as you obviously know, China is or has been at least incredibly active in Central and Eastern Europe.
Hmm.
With investment, which usually is followed with a political, interest in the processes that take place in our countries. And in many cases, it has been so that the countries in the region, they kind of do accept that as an inevitability of
Hmm.
sorts. We're too far away. We're small. We don't have wide diplomatic corps, and so for us, obviously, we are interested in the regions further away, especially where the industries are bigger, where we would have investment opportunities, or the countries would invest in us. But the only country from the faraway Indo-Pacific region that actually approached us is China.
Hmm.
So, as years go by, if you think Indo-Pacific, you think China. And I'm talking obviously about the region, Eastern and Central Europe. But as I mentioned, there's clearly no free breakfast for China, right?
Hmm.
They if they invest, they have also political interest. If they invest more, they have more political interest, and then suddenly you understand that your opportunities are rather limited when it
Right.
comes to standing up against for I don't know for Taiwan, or for Hong Kong, or for whatever else. So we had a case in 2019. There was a protest, I would say, against the crackdown of Hong Kong, freedom movement, or liberty movement,
Hmm.
democracy movement. So because Lithuania, as I mentioned, right, we are a country of freedom, and wherever the freedom is threatened, we do stand up and
Yeah.
go out in the streets, wave the flags, and ask government to notice the people, and that sort of thing. So, and this is where China intervened, but not politically, but physically. They've sent out in the center of Vilnius a counter protest, and there was a clash of protesters between the protesters, pro Hong Kong and kind of anti or pro PRC. And it was the first time that we actually understood that we
Yeah.
are not that
Visibly.
far away. Yeah,
Right.
the people were paid by the Chinese embassy. Chinese embassy prepared, them the messages that they were bringing in with them, and kind of and told them what to do, and so many other things. So there was clearly a political intervention into something, in a democratic country, into our freedom of gathering, and other things.
Hmm.
And this is where we started thinking, look, we have to rethink our Indo-Pacific strategy,
Right.
right? We want to have one. I'm sure that we're able to have one, but it cannot go through Beijing.
Hmm.
We need other partners. We need to be visible, and we need partners mostly with like-minded countries. And then this is where. So we need political leadership, and then hopefully economic and other interests would follow. Because if we continue this path, it will bring more and more risks. So this is where our path began. Then we won election. Started building up our Indo-Pacific strategy.
Hmm.
Part of it was establishing ties with Taiwan, and here we are. But
Yeah.
I mentioned other thing that we do support freedom, and the kind of the notion of it,
Yep.
because as I mentioned at the beginning, we're not so not so far not so long ago, we've ourselves have been not free,
Yeah.
subjected to a greater power, to our neighbor, and we understand what it means, in order to push back on it, and why we need to support those who are feeling the same way.
Yeah, that's really empowering. Thank you, Gabrielius. Now, you were just in Taiwan recently, according to our sources. What were your impressions of the mood there? And, how do you feel about the trajectory of the conflict there? Because I think in DC, there are a lot of different views about where and if and when there'd be a Taiwan fight in the Taiwan Strait. So how do you see that trajectory following your visit there?
I think that's
You can get a free pass as well. If you want to skip any questions, Gabrielius, feel
sure,
free to
sure, sure. No, no,
exercise
it's
your
fine. It's not a very difficult question. I mean, I'm looking at Taiwan through, sort of Ukrainian lens,
Yes.
and I'm sure that that China is definitely doing the same thing. And so throughout my visit there, throughout my conversations there, you know, I I I tried to bring in the thinking from our part of the world, how most likely the West would react to a crisis in Taiwan, from what we know that happened in Ukraine.
Hmm.
The nuclear blackmail, the this encroachment, the control of narratives,
Mm.
and so many other things. And they do. I think that there's so much similarity in this,
Hmm.
and we're already seeing certain things. For example, there has been, I think, rather a month ago, if I'm not mistaken, there was an article in Australia, one of the leading business magazines, by Chinese ambassador.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Infamous article, I would call it. There was a response by a Taiwanese representative as well later on, but in principle, when I read the article by Chinese ambassador, it sounds like Putin, you know,
Right.
explaining, because Putin used, in several times in 2012 and later 2019, he used, I think, in Financial Times, he would issue an op-ed saying, look, Ukraine is basically just Russia,
Mm.
and he would use words like, oh, we're brothers,
Mm.
and those resisting us, they are the enemy, right? Because the countries are so close, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be together. And I'm thinking that maybe for an uninformed reader, it might look as even a benevolent idea,
Mm.
right? Brothers do not fight, and brotherly love is a kind of a nice thing to talk about.
Yeah. They've
But
clearly
when
never had
you,
brothers, probably. I don't have brothers. I'm
yeah,
an only child, but yeah.
but yeah, but the point is that the same argument is then used to justify an invasion and
Mm.
basically a genocide of another country.
Hmm.
So when I read, that by Chinese ambassador, that this is clearly the same country, I understand that, the one China policy, but the way that it is framed, it would justify in the Western, it's trying to justify in the Western mind that, look, it's not your business what will happen here.
Hmm.
We'll figure out behind the closed door.
Hmm.
And it's a bit scary. So, and it's just one example. And clearly there are many more like this. So I think that the Taiwan is doing very, very well to prepare
Mm.
for I usually call it, for deterrence, because we don't want war. Nobody wants war.
Right. Exactly.
So what are you preparing for? You're preparing to deter, so
Yes.
that, the one that tries to subjugate you, that he wouldn't try this.
Yep. I think, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, on that note, I want to make sure we've got a lot of great questions in the Q&A, but I want to make sure we have enough time for them. So one more question before the lightning round and then Q&A. So many of the
Sure.
folks listening, watching you, and reading this later are in positions to make a difference either now or as their careers progress in the public or private space. So what's one bit of career advice you have, Gabrielius, given this extensive career that you had in public service and international relations?
Well,
I
do the right thing, stick to the right
love
right
that.
side of right
Yeah.
side of history, because clearly, I mean, it's such an incredible time to be a diplomat, a politician, because almost everything that we do will define history books. It's really, incredible to think about it.
Mm. True.
It took me a while when I understood that I have to write a diary because the things that are happening around they are just too important and too historic. Really, it's not
Yes.
not about me, but about the stuff around. And
Yes.
I'm sure that everyone in a similar line of work feels or sees the same thing. So it's very very important that we measure ourselves not just through the lens of today's work, or it's difficult or hard, but basically from the lens of history.
Yeah. And we're all really highly anticipating your memoir when it launches. We'll probably
Yep,
do another book
I'll
launch
try
event
not
or
to hold it
something.
back.
Yeah. Well, Gabrielius, now we're at the lightning round. So I'm going to say
Okay.
three things. Now you just have to tell me the first word that comes to mind when you think of these things. So an easy one to start, international intrigue.
Well, intriguing.
Okay, good. That's a good one. Globalization.
Uh, uh, well, I think that it played its part. Now we'll see what happens next.
Okay. And Munich Security Conference.
Well, I hope that it doesn't become Munich too,
Ah, that's a
meaning
good one.
that
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good one. Excellent. Well, now we've got lots of questions from the audience. The first one here is about, the future of Ukraine. As we know, I think some call it the day after, but there's a lot of discussions around the ceasefire, but then what actually is in the substance of that.
Mhm.
So, what do you think, a successful peace agreement would look like from Lithuania's or maybe even the Baltics' point of view? In an ideal world, if you could design it.
Okay, that's a good it's good that you added that. In the ideal world, Ukraine would be able to retake the lands that are currently under occupation and make
Mm.
sure that the country is not attacked again, that is able to rebuild, and it's able to join the Western alliances, NATO and EU.
Hmm.
This is what I wish for Ukraine. This is how we secure not just Ukraine, but we secure my country as well.
Hmm.
Because if Russia loses in Ukraine, it most likely will not try, at least for a while, will not try that again. If it believes that it won in Ukraine, this is the biggest problem, that it will try again because it did that in the past, and there's no reason why it to change its mind. And then we are in a very troubling situation. And I think that this is actually where we are very much approaching that,
Hmm.
uh, because even now we're figuring out that when President Zelensky is asking for security guarantees, and now clearly we're saying no NATO, no troops. Maybe Europe has to send troops, but Europe is very very much unwilling and probably not very capable to do that, and that leaves Ukraine pretty much alone in the battlefield for the future. And this is rather bad, and it's scary.
Yeah, and to just keep deep diving on that question, actually, we have a really good question from one of our readers who asks, Russia may insist that any peace agreement includes Ukrainian recognition that the occupied territories are now legally part of Russia, leading to
Mm-hmm.
the lifting of international sanctions against Russia. Do you think Zelensky would accept the abandonment of any Ukrainian legal claim to the occupied territories as the price of peace?
Mm-hmm. I would find it very hard to believe that he would take this sort of
Right.
deal.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean,
Well,
I
no,
cannot
that's a
talk
good
for
answer.
yeah, I cannot talk for the leader of another country. It will be his probably the most difficult decisions that he will have to make in
Yeah.
one form or the other. But I
Right.
would not be surprised if Ukraine would just say that, well, we'll continue fighting, we'll continue dying, and then we'll see how that works out for the West.
Yeah. And look, Zelensky, I think it's incredible his energy over the last few years. It's seriously impressive how much
Mhm.
he's done for the country.
Yeah.
Um, what advice do you think you would give to him and other Ukrainian leaders to
Mm.
sustain and gain more support from Europe? Because I think, as we've seen, there's a little bit of
Mhm.
lethargy, or at least maybe a little bit of, I guess, exhaustion from Europe and other supporters for
Mhm.
Ukraine sometimes. But really, how do you think these Ukrainian leaders can sort of get more support and also tell the narrative of what value Ukraine brings to Europe and the broader world? And separately, this reader also said, "Thank you very much for a very informative and fun conversation."
Thank you. Um, I think that if there's a lesson that we all learn from Ukraine's fight, is that whenever you're offered a flight, ask for bullets.
Hmm.
And I think that's what it proved, that there were very few who believed that Ukraine would be able to fight off the first attack. And they proved everybody wrong. And this is what forced us to help them, not the other way around. The help did not come first, the fight came
Yeah.
first. And I think that this is the main lesson that I'm taking, away from this. That if they continue fighting, we will have to continue supporting. It's inevitable.
Hmm.
And clearly that's, it might sound even cynical to say this, but unfortunately this is the reality of today. And it works not just in Ukraine, it works also, for example, in Georgia,
Yeah.
where the protesters for, I don't know, 75 days are protesting every single day. There are so many in Europe who would like them not to protest. They would like them to go home and just forget the whole case.
Yeah.
But we're unable, because people are out there and they are asking for our support, that they are asking to be recognized and not forgotten, and then we're forced to do something about it.
Hmm.
So again, it's not the most honorable hour of the West, but we could do better.
Yeah, and Ukrainian remains a very strategically important country, for in
Yeah.
Europe for many reasons. If only like even
Mhm.
economic output from Ukraine, like we, thinking about lots of demining work in Ukraine and I think per square footage, the amount of product and produce it can produce in terms
Yeah.
of wheat for the rest of the global majority is really, really disproportionately big.
Yeah.
Now, back to your favorite topic. I have a topic question from one of our readers about the EU structure, right? You noted that the EU structure slows down decision making, but what do you think, in your experience there, what specific reforms are most critical to enable the EU to respond more effectively to the, I think,
Mhm.
poly-crisis that we're seeing today?
Well, I would take two steps in that direction. One step is the one that requires just political will and doesn't require any treaty change.
Mm.
And this is the implementation of what is called the Article 7. Article 7 allows to, if implemented fully, it allows for a right of vote, for a right of
Mhm.
veto to be removed from a country. Um, Sorry. So, and that would, in turn, for example, limit the disruptive power of a country like Hungary.
Yeah.
If a country constantly breaks the principle of solidarity, you can go that way and suspend their right to vote.
Mhm.
When it comes to the treaty change, obviously, I know that we're talking about incredibly difficult, task for Europe,
Yeah.
because the treaty, when it's changed, it has to be ratified by every single member country.
Yeah.
Go
It'll
through
take
the
5 years for sure.
yeah, but then again, my strong belief is that the crisis at hand, and I'm not just talking about Russia, but the
Yeah.
way that we deal with United States and China requires us to do that. And
Mm.
I would say that without a further federalization of EU, it will be difficult to stave off the crises that have come our way.
Yeah. Now, I know we've only got 2 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we end on time. But I have one question from one of our readers who's particularly interested in working in international relations and diplomacy. How did you start pursuing this career after your studies? And did you want to work in this domain from the start, or do you think life pulled you in this direction? I chose this question because I know that your life has been influenced by others in your family and sort of your
Yeah.
background as well. So I'd love to hear, and take us out with this question and tell us more about you and your mission, Gabrielius.
Well, I mean, I'm probably a fourth generation
Yeah,
who's working for
yeah.
for a country. So it kind of wasn't a very difficult choice in that sense. There was always an understanding that, okay, we somehow are in this line where
Here we
we
go
are
again,
asked, yeah, where we are asked to do something for a country that maybe not everybody are willing. So my main choice was whether it's politics or diplomacy at the start, and I
Hmm.
wanted to do something completely different than my grandfather did. So I chose diplomacy because I thought that would be my unique way of contributing to my country. I was in that path for a bit more than a decade, and
Hmm.
then I decided that I will switch to politics. so so
Yeah,
yeah, kind of I started, I tried to avoid it, but
it drew
I
you
I
back in.
it drew me back in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so now I'm taking a break from politics a little bit. I'll see where that takes me again. So, yeah.
We are so excited to see where, you go next, Gabrielius. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure everyone's going to be able to join me in a virtual round of applause for you and
Thank you
hearing
so
your
much.
insights. And for everyone else, I'm Helen Zhang, one of the co-founders of Intrigue Media, and I hope you can all subscribe on internationalintrigue.io. And thank you again, Gabrielius, and we'll share his website and everything else in the show notes as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. Take care.